My name's Ben. I'm an internal advisor here to Emerald Coast Marine. I am fortunate enough to have made my living on the water for quite a few years, and just recently, looking for a little bit of consistency, I was able to come in here and get plugged in with this whole establishment. And then we brought Simon in. Simon is the local expert to our tackle shop that we've got in Fort Walton Beach. It's called Emerald Coast Bait and Tackle. It's a relatively new tackle shop that was started a couple of years ago by another local family that has a couple inshore charter boats. Simon is not originally from here, but he's very valuable to us and to me because he knows tackle, the ins and outs of the technical side of things better than anybody I've ever met. So he's going to be a really good resource for any questions about specific items. I do kind of want to run this a little bit as a question and answer for the most part. Like I said, when they originally asked me to come do this, it's an awesome opportunity, but they only gave me about 30 minutes to talk. And so I want to cover as much information as I can without throwing it all up on you, but I also kind of want to be as custom as I can to what your particular questions are based on your skill level and what you would like to do. So that's why Simon is, going to be a great resource for any specific stuff. Like I said, he's not local to this area, but he knows this stuff inside and out. So we're going to kind of take a general approach to it, but as we kind of work through a very basic PowerPoint that I made last night, if y'all have questions or you'd like to kind of go off on a rabbit trail in a different direction, I'd love to do that because that's going to allow us to, again, touch base on some of these things that are, a little bit more personal to you. The crazy thing about inshore fishing, when I'm talking to people doing this, I call it inshore hunting because while anybody can go out there and fish, every day is a little bit different. You don't know what you're going to encounter, and it's just kind of it's an experience where anything can happen. And so we're going to kind of roll right into this.
And you tell me, just kind of say when you want me to jump in or however you want to.
Whenever. I'd like to just try to keep this as open as I can. This PowerPoint, again, everybody fishes differently. Everybody has different opinions, different techniques. And so I kind of come up here from my own opinions, my own experiences. That's how I teach. I like to teach from examples, but I do things one way. Simon does things one way. Captain Dave does things another way. So everybody has their own tips and tricks to it, which is why the very first thing that I wanted to talk about was preparation. Really what you'll see is people that are posted online, people that are talking about fishing in the tackle shops, people that are catching fish. The biggest thing that we encounter when we have customers coming in buying boats, friends and family that are coming down here on vacation to go fishing and whatnot, they see that people are catching fish, but then they go out and try to do it and they don't have the same success that they're seeing online. A lot of that is because the people that are fishing every single day are doing exactly that. The conditions are always changing. The techniques are always changing. The guys that are on the water every single day are gonna catch more fish because they're following patterns, they're seeing the changes and they're adapting to it. So when I have people that come in and they will ask us, say, hey, I'm fishing next weekend, where do I go? Yeah, I don't always know how to answer that. It's different every weekend, every day. I can't say, oh, if you go here, you're gonna catch fish. So I tell people the most important thing about inshore fishing or inshore hunting is the preparation that you're gonna do before you fish.
And he's talking about preparation before. We're not even into areas that you target, how you target, where you fish. Get a journal. I know it sounds crazy, talking about areas that you fish. Well, he may catch fish at A on Monday, but on B, they're not there anymore because you got an hour different tide flow. Something as super simple as that. So if you I'll throw a couple of bullet points in, but the first one is keep a journal fishing. It'll help you day in, day out. A small one that I keep, and it's highly unintentional, is I put pictures on Facebook, and some people hate it, but it gives me a year update every single year of when I caught fish, and I know where I was at. I leave enough out of the background so everybody's not camped out there the next day. Don't put pictures of the White House in the bend of your favorite river or creek or bayou or bay, because if you do, somebody's going to catch on to it, and somebody at this seminar is going to be in your spot the next day.
Yeah, and it's funny you say that because I do exactly that. So I log everything that I do. And that helps me because I could say, oh, you know, this time last year, for whatever reason, I was catching them here. And the longer you keep that log, the better it gets, and it's never right. But it has been so helpful to me. The second thing, I call it cyber scouting, which is exactly what he talked on. Look, people, they catch fish, they want to brag about them, they're going to post pictures online. I'm not saying message this guy up and say, where'd you catch that fish? What were you using? But if he's going to post a picture up there and you're going to have multiple people posting pictures, if you join these Facebook groups, you go to local tackle shops that will have a digital picture frame going, you're going to see these pictures and you're going to see patterns. You're going to say, oh, you know, in the springtime, we're noticing all these guys are they're fishing 100 yards off of the shoreline. So we know that they're fishing 8 foot of water. You see a jig head hanging out of the trout's mouth, so you kind of know what they're doing. So that is something that I think a lot of people don't take account of, is the amount of information you can get online before you ever leave your house. That's the most important thing. I do it all the time. If I take a break from fishing and I'm getting back into it and I've got some trips lined up, I will spend hours at night on all my Facebook groups trying to find patterns, see what other people are doing, because if they're investing all this time on the water, you might as well try to benefit from it and take advantage of the information that people are putting out there, even if they don't realize that they're doing it. That's something that I always joke about, is you'll see people posting pictures where they're blurring out backgrounds and they're trying to hide where they're catching their fish. But ultimately, if somebody is posting pictures about it, you know, you're going to be able to get a lot of information from it, daytime, nighttime, what tackle they're using. And so that is the most important thing to being successful, because a lot of these guys, they're out there every single day, they're seeing patterns. You know, when you go fishing, you go where you think the fish are going to be. And so that kind of brings up my second point, which is confidence levels. When you get out on the water, if you're not confident in what you're doing, you're not going to be as patient, you're not going to be as thorough. So the second thing that I tell people when I take them out there is, you want to do your prep work so that you're confident in where you're fishing and what you're using, so that you're going to be more patient, you're going to be more thorough, you're going to take better notes and find better patterns, and you're going to be more successful doing so, just because you're a little bit more dedicated to it. So and that's one thing.
You mentioned the confidence side. We're not to bait or where to fish or how to fish, but whenever you go out, like I throw a whole bunch of artificials. If I could not, I've gotten cussed out more than anybody in this room in the past 2 months because we hadn't had live bait. If you can substitute an artificial for a live bait, cover more ground, take more time. And the issue that I see with people are people terrified of a pack of gulp shrimp. And this is probably one of the best baits. And I have confidence every time I tie something on one of my rods and reels. If you've got confidence in what you're fishing, it definitely, I don't know if the fish feel the mojo or however you want to take that in, but if you don't have confidence in what you're tying on the end of that rod, just stay home that day.
Yeah, I mean, my tackle box is very small, the one that I use, because over the years I have a lot of confidence in a few things, and sometimes I am a little bit stubborn, and a guy might show up with a big tackle box and he's trying different colors and different lures and constantly changing out. You know, I'm very different. I will show up with my rods rigged. I've got a small box. I have the lures that I've been using for many years with the techniques that I've been using for many years, and so, you know, generally I can be very successful with that because I'm very deliberate about what I do, how I'm doing it, where I'm doing it. And that's just comes from experience over time, but it comes from the prep work and the confidence of going to an area, being confident in what I'm doing, and slowing down. The big thing with inshore fishing is it's not fast paced like the offshore stuff you're used to. You're not sending a cigar minnow 60 feet down and giving it a 3 count and then trying to reel up a snapper. We are going out and we have to be very deliberate. We're hunting, we are checking out areas, and you know, we're trying to be as streamlined as we can be until we are finding a pattern that's going to be successful for that particular day and capitalizing on it. What do we have next? All right, so breaking into the tackle side of things, and you know, again, speaking from my own experience and my own opinions, the inshore tackle that I use is very downsized compared to what I see a lot of people using, and what I think a lot of people generally consider. I'm using the smallest tackle that I can get away with. I do that because when I'm inshore fishing, I'm gonna make 100 casts a morning. I'm gonna be standing on the bow of the boat, and I'm just gonna constantly be casting that rod. So to me, it's very important that I stay comfortable so I'm not fatiguing myself, so I'm using tackle that is easy to manage. And so we brought some examples. We're gonna keep these out. You know, kind of just talking general sizes of things. And, you know, this is something that I don't think you really, you know, if you go into any tackle shop and you talk to anybody behind the counter, you know, everybody's gonna steer you in the right direction. So I speak from my own opinions about what I like to use, but, you know, we have general tackle, we've got general sizes that in my opinion are gonna be more comfortable, you know, they're not gonna break the bank.
And he was referring to size of rods and reels behind me. It says 2,500 and 3,000. That's a super broad spectrum because no matter which manufacturer you buy a reel from, the sizes could be very different. Where this is a 3,000 Daiwa BG and this is a 2,500 Shimano Vanford. It's all going to depend on budget and stuff due to weight, but 2,500, 3,000 should be able to catch anything you want in the bays and bayous. Even you can dual purpose some of these 3,000s.
The big reds?
Big reds, it just depends on how much structure you're around.
Yeah.
So sometimes you could kick it up to a 4,000 or a 4,500, which is just a touch bigger. Or even when you're talking about going bigger, you can also go lighter if you're in open water for the trout, even big redfish, where this is a 1,000. As he was saying earlier, I like technical fishing. I will keep this in my hand if I'm not around docks. This is my go-to rod, and it's a featherlight. These little guys put out like 12 pounds of drag, so it's more than enough to catch everything you want. But whenever it comes to looking at new tackle or buying something new, I always ask people about their budget, kind of what they're wanting to spend. This guy in my right hand is the most popular $200 rod and reel that we sell in the shop, and it's a St. Croix Triumph and a Daiwa BG. Like you said, we'll keep these up here and y'all can come up here and check them out.
Yeah, that's, you know, I when I take a lot of friends and family out, people will show up with their own tackle, and somebody will show up with a rod and reel that is just completely oversized for what we're doing because they want no chance of losing that fish. But what happens is they're standing up there, it starts to fatigue, they're using heavier line that limits a natural presentation that you're trying to give, and ultimately they end up asking if they can use what I brought to be a little bit more comfortable. And so that's a big thing that I see all the time, especially with newcomers that are going into a tackle shop and they're trying to outfit a new boat that they bought for whatever reason, they're trying to upgrade what they're using. I think that people generally buy tackle that is too big. Inshore fishing, we are fishing for, even when you're looking for a 40-inch redfish. A couple years ago, Dave and I had a really good trip where we brought 30 redfish over 40 inches into the boat, and we were using these 2,500 size reels on these rods. Wow. I mean, and because it's comfortable, it's finesse, but ultimately, you know, the fish that you're fishing for, you're not going for these massive grouper, these huge king mackerel that are gonna run 100 yards in a second. The fish that we're fishing for, this is more than enough for it. You don't have to overestimate your tackle. And so that's just like a personal thing of mine that I think is so important that a lot of people overlook.
You were talking about were you wanting to cover like tackle as in pliers here? Or were you talking about shades like all the way around starting your trip?
So the other thing that I always bring this up, again, people, you jump on a boat with somebody, simple things, they don't have a landing net, they don't have a good pair of pliers, they don't have a good pair of sunglasses. Everybody loves accessories, which sometimes it blows my mind that people don't have some of these things, but you don't need 100 accessories, but it is important, I think, to spend money on decent equipment to make fishing a little bit more convenient, a little bit easier for you. Hopefully increase your success ratio a little bit. Landing nets, not enough people own landing nets on their boats. We're fishing with small tackle, we're using light lines. You know, when you're offshore, it's one thing to dead stick a fish over the rail, but if you're fishing with 10-pound monofilament leader on a 3-pound trout,
don't ever sling a 1-pound trout on light tackle because you'll break rods.
Buy a net, buy decent pliers, buy decent polarized sunglasses. You know, all of these items are just little things that are going to make you more comfortable, make you a little bit more confident, and overall it's going to make your day a little bit more enjoyable. Fishing is relatively inconvenient. There's a lot that goes into it, a lot of planning, a lot of prep work, and so some of these items you can, just to avoid silly mistakes, you can have on your boat, and they're gonna, it just blows my mind that some people don't have them. So. And
you talked about spending good money on nice stuff. I kind of throw a small caveat out there. If you're not going to take care of it, don't buy nice stuff. If you're not going to take care of it, buy the least expensive stuff that you can buy, or buy the nicest, because the stuff that's in the middle doesn't seem to hold up as well as you would think it would. So buy something that you're okay with throwing away, or buy something that you want to keep forever. I bring these pliers. This is a super, super nice pair of pliers. These guys are $10. If they go overboard, I don't feel bad. If you hold on to stuff like it's your best friend and you're not going to lose it, invest in a nice pair of pliers, because they will last forever.
Yeah, and that, like tackle boxes, you'll see a lot of people that will, they'll take a standard tackle box like this, and you've got $60, $80 worth of lures in it, and it'll get left outside for whatever reason. Your stuff will rust, and all of a sudden you've got all these lures with terrible hooks on them. And so he's got a box next to it which has a waterproof seal around it. Little things like that that a lot of people don't think about to protect what you're using, make it a little bit more convenient, organize your stuff a little bit better. That's just something that I'm constantly finding myself telling to people when it comes down to accessories. All right.
I wouldn't bring them if I didn't.
Yeah. And again, we kind of said earlier, a lot of the stuff that we brought out, like this stuff on my table is basically what my inshore tackle box is. It's a fraction of what Simon carries around with him. We're two very different people in the way we fish.
I'm the guy that gets on the boat that you're like, why'd you bring 3 tackle bags? But if a big shark swims behind the boat, I'm a person, I like catching everything. So if it's been a slow day and we've got stuff on top, that's why I keep this rod. This I keep on beside me at all times with shiny stuff attached to it, because I'll bend the rod on a ladyfish. If it's super, super slow that day, I don't have a problem with throwing a gotcha plug out for some Spanish or some ladyfish. But yeah.
Yeah, when we talk about rigging and lures and things that we use, I kind of break it up into 3 categories. Live bait being the last one, because I am too lazy for live bait, although it is the best bait to use. If you're willing to put the effort in and the money in for live shrimp, that is always the best thing to do. If it is a charter trip that I'm doing, I always have shrimp on the boat, because that live bait, shrimp, minnows, that is the best way to get success on that fishing trip. But when I'm fishing by myself, I like to cover a lot more ground. And so I kind of break my lures up into, lures where I'm gonna cover a lot of water, and lures when I find the fish, I'm gonna slow it down and I'm gonna start finesse fishing. Do we want to spend time talking about it? Does
anybody want us to kind of pull off from live bait fishing to finesse fishing and kind of what tackle we use on that, or is that something that people, I got one head nod? I can briefly just touch on finesse fishing.
Yeah,
So we're gonna take it way back, where I'm gonna go from a 3,000, I'm gonna be in a 2,500 or a 1,000. I'm gonna be fishing smaller tackle. And he didn't quite get to line yet, so I'm gonna kind of hop onto that. So when we're live bait fishing, 20-pound max on the braid. If we go around docks, I might go to a 30-pound braid, but it's probably not necessary. Typically 30, 20, and when I'm finesse fishing, I'm gonna go down to 8 and 10. This 1,000 that I have up here, it's got 8-pound braid on it, and I've caught 38-inch redfish on this combo. I'm not horsing them, I'm taking my time, but it's all super, super light duty. This rod's a 2 to 4 pound rated rod. So just in finesse fishing, you're gonna take your time, slow it down. If you think that you're reeling too slow, reel slower. I'm dragging the bait back to the boat, super, super slow. But finesse fishing, just taking your time.
Yeah, and then, the other side of that, live bait fishing, is something that, Simon excels at. Again, like I said, I get a little impatient. So just my personality, I like working lures. I like the finesse side of things. Live bait, you cannot go wrong with it. It's worth the time. It's worth the investment to better your odds. Like I said, when I'm taking charters out, I've got live shrimp. If I get into an area, I know that I've got fish here. Let's say I've been fishing the same structure for the last couple of weeks. I'm confident in it. I'm gonna show up with shrimp, and I'm gonna have a guy with lures and a guy with shrimp, and the shrimp is gonna outcatch every single time without fail. It is worth the time investment. It's a little bit of a learning curve. You are gonna wonder where your shrimp are going every time you cast them out, so you always wanna overbuy what you think you're gonna need, but that is, I could spend hours talking about the differences between the two and what I prefer, but shrimp is worth the time investment. It's especially if you are not going out often, you've got 1 weekend a month to get out there. You've done your research and you're confident that you're seeing people are catching fish around docks. You're gonna rig a popping cork with 2 foot of line and a hook underneath of it. And for 2 people, you're gonna buy 6 dozen shrimp. You're gonna go catch them. You're gonna catch everything. You're gonna catch catfish, you know, you're gonna catch little pinfish and croakers, but you're also gonna catch those trout and those redfish. It's the way to go.
And he's talking about live bait. I talked about the journal being one takeaway. Big fish eat small fish every day of the week. So if you've got some sort of live fish that you can put on the end of your rod, take the time, cover ground. These big trout people are catching, if you can take the time and throw the cast net around some croaker, you're gonna catch some big trout around some docks. Just taking the time, covering ground. And he mentioned about how you'll catch more fish with live bait typically. You'll find that time when that water temperature starts to change and slow down and you can't go out and consistently throw a cast net and catch bait. That's when it's time to switch over to some artificials. And you'll see that artificial slowly migrate where you can catch more fish on artificials than live bait when it becomes more difficult to find.
Yeah.
Because the fish are hungry.
They never stop eating. You know, that's when you start getting back into the finesse, and there's a lot of different baits that, you know, I think that baits are made to attract fishermen more than they are fish, but there's a lot out there through trial and error, different scents. We've got one thing up here called Procure. It's a gel. It's supposed to smell like a shrimp, and you can squirt it on your lure. I have buddies that swear by that. It's not something that I've really invested a ton of time into. I've tried it a few times. I don't really have a whole lot of confidence in it. That being said, my roommate should be sponsored by them. Those empty cans are all over my boat and they're all his. And so when you start getting into finesse, you start trying different things, you start trying natural presentations to mimic that live bait as best you can. You know, over time, you'll start to see that success ratio go up.
And on here, you went from line, we went to live baits. Get back to lures. If you're fishing with lures, I like to take a small spread. You don't have to have 100 bags. Mimic everything that's swimming. I fly fish too. Whenever I go fly fishing, I match the hatch. That's what we're gonna throw a nymph because the nymphs are hatching. So here, you've got glass minnows, you've got mullet, you've got some menhaden mixed in, a couple other varieties. I'll take a tiny swim bait, which is Z-Man makes a slim swim. There's a whole bunch of other brands. And then I'll carry something about the size of a mullet. And then I'll carry something bigger like a 4-inch diesel minnow. You wanna cover the spread and then maybe mix a hard bait in there. I'm a big fan of some of the Yozuri hard baits and some of the MirrOlure hard baits. Just a small spread, 3 or 4 baits, and that way you're covering the spread. They might not be feeding on glass minnows, they might be eating the finger mullet. So they're not gonna eat the small bait, just covering the spread.
Yeah, a lot of times I'll jump on a boat, I'll have 4 or 5 rods rigged up. I've got my finesse baits, I've got casting spoons and plugs and things like that. When I get to the area that I want to start fishing, I'm going to put a lure on that allows me to generally have a quicker retrieve so I can cover more water. And I might not necessarily expect a fish to hit that lure, but I'm covering water, I'm looking for patterns. I might start up at a dock. A gold spoon is, we call these a locator lure. You can tie a gold spoon on and you can fish a 200-yard span of shoreline in 30 minutes and confidently cover that ground. And if you're up there and you're not catching fish, you're not seeing fish, all right, so you're gonna start moving around. If you rolled into that area with live shrimp, you're gonna waste a couple of dozen shrimp, you're gonna sit in one small area and you're not gonna be sure. If I go in with a locator lure, I sweep that whole shoreline and I'm confident I'm not seeing the bait, I'm not seeing the fish, I'm not getting the strikes, I'm gonna move on to what my plan B was and kind of go from there.
And he's talking about covering ground. Obviously, either y'all own a boat, fish on a boat or something of that nature. These guys behind me, these trolling motors, have changed the fishing game in the past 15 years in saltwater, especially with the iPilot function, because you can stand in the back, somebody can stand on the bow of the boat, and you can get where you need to go versus pulling an anchor 100 times. If you don't have one of those and you fish on a boat that has one, you're probably going to be in here seeing this guy the next couple of weeks to put one on your boat.
Yeah, trolling motors are cheating. That is something, if you are really getting into it and you want to be a boat fisherman, a trolling motor is just as important as the outboard motor on a fishing boat, in my opinion. That trolling motor is going to allow you the opportunity to change plans quickly, to cover ground, to very conveniently and comfortably fish without having to mess with an anchor, run your outboard motor. It's something that there should be no question, in my opinion. That should be worked into a budget.
Change it up for you, huh? You don't have to pull an anchor anymore. You don't get frustrated.
Yeah, that's something we see. Boats will come in and they'll pick an area they're interested in, they'll drop an anchor or they'll drift, and there's nothing wrong with that. But there's a commitment to dropping that anchor. Now, you have the space that you can cast around you, and you're going to cover that, and at some point you're going to give up, you're going to pull that anchor up, and you're going to have to figure out where to go. Versus the guy that pulled up next to you with a trolling motor, he fished that span of water in 3 or 4 minutes, and he's already moving on. The way we use our trolling motors when we're trying to locate fish, especially this time of year when the water's starting to get hot, you'll have a week of low salinity because we've had lots of rain, and then you'll have a week of high salinity because we get a strong tide and we don't get rain. I'm going to go out to an area, I might fish structure, I might fish deep water, I might fish grass, I'm not sure. That trolling motor is going to allow me to work a zigzag pattern and hit all of that. And in the span of 3 hours, I'm going to be able to cover, every opinion I've got of where I think those fish might be, versus somebody that comes in that doesn't have a trolling motor and they're going to drift or they're going to anchor. They're going to come into an area, give it their best guess, and hope it pays off.
And when we were talking about rigging and how you rig and what to fish with, live bait, how many of y'all throw a popping cork? How many of y'all used a slip float rig before? Take the time and look up slip float rig. It enables you to fish 7 feet of water, 15 feet of water with a popping cork, because it slides up and hits a bead and stops. That's also a tactic that I use when I'm fishing live bait. It's super, super helpful as a slip float.
A popping cork, I have a rod on my boat that has a popping cork on it that I have not cut off in like 5 years, because I have a great level of confidence in them. I can give it to a 10-year-old kid and they're gonna know how to use it, and I can give it to Simon and he knows how to use it, and it's gonna catch fish for everybody. Putting a minnow under it, a live shrimp, putting a soft plastic gulp or a shrimp looking lure, that is a locator lure in my book. I think everybody should own a popping cork.
And you can fish the sides of the current with it too, where if you're throwing a Carolina rig, which is an egg sinker, a swivel, a leader, and a hook, you're casting away from you and reeling back to the boat, your popping cork will float your left to right or right to left, depending on your tides flowing that day. So you're covering 2 different axes, whether it's to you and away or left to right. So it's also a couple of different options.
Yeah. I guess lastly, location is something that I wanted to spend some time talking on. It's my recommendations, my opinions, my confidence levels are different than Simon's, and it is all opinion based, but there's still some standards to that. Fishing structure, fishing basically changes. The way I just explain it to people is, if you put on a mask and snorkel and you go jump in the water and start swimming around, it's going to look like a desert. You're going to be swimming around and it's going to be sand and nothing else until you find something different, whether it is, a mini fridge that some kid threw off his parents' dock years ago that's half sunk, whether it's, a dock, a drop off, something that is different. That is what we focus on. And so I see people doing this all the time again when they're drift fishing and they're on this massive expanse of shoreline that's 3 feet deep and there's nothing. It's just sand. There's nothing different. You're wasting your time. So going out into an area, it changes by the season, by the day, by the hour, but focus on something different, whether it's structure, whether it's a drop off. And it's just a magnet for fish, because it is so funny, because I love swimming around in there doing spear fishing, jumping in that water, swimming around. You're going to notice that there's nothing out there. If it's just sand, there's no fish, there's no bait, there's nothing.
Rocks, docks, grass beds. If you're not fishing rocks, docks, and grass beds, you're probably not seeing anything. All of that structure holds bait. Big fish eat small fish. Got fish.
So that's a big thing when we go out. Generally, a rule of thumb is, anywhere that a fish could ambush another fish, whether that, all the changes on the bottom, all the structure, it's ambush points and temperature breaks is kind of what I focus on.
Yeah, I like hard structure, edges, stuff like that. The flounder fishery is good here, but it's not great. But if I'm going to focus on a flounder, I'm going to find a hard edge on the side of a grass bed. It's successful. People do it regularly. I've seen a bunch of fish caught that way. Good option.
So, we'll come in there and a quick overview. Springtime, the spring and the fall are the two best times to fish, in my opinion, because that is when the water is either increasing in temperature or decreasing in temperature. That causes a lot of stuff to be moving. You have, in the springtime, you have bait hatching. In the fall time, you have bait that was very, very microscopic in the beginning of the summer. Now they're a little bit bigger and they're a little bit more appealing to a lot of those predators that we're targeting.
If it's crazy, crazy hot outside and it's uncomfortable for you to go outside, the fishing is definitely slowed down a whole bunch.
So when we go out on an incredibly hot day, late in the summer, we're fishing deep water, we're fishing structure that provides shade. That might give it a little bit of a temperature break. We see it all the time in the middle of the day. People talk about how fishing shuts down. Well, these fish are very sensitive to the temperature, they're very sensitive to the light. So that's why you see a lot of people fishing mornings and evenings, is there's less light intrusion to those fish. They're going to be a little bit more comfortable when they're up there. Later in the day, we will go hit these docks. I will drive my boat up there till I practically hit the dock. And you'll see these redfish just sitting, on the sand, in the shade, not really moving. These fish are always eating. They might look like they're asleep. Something is going to trigger them to hit, but you just have to find them. People say the fishing shuts down. The fish have just moved.
That's where those gold spoons play in really, really well, because you're able to cover ground, get in front of the redfish, and have that little bit of flash to draw some attention. And if he swings at it, good to go. Yeah,
so structure, we will, in the fall, we love fishing bridges. In the fall is a unique time to fish because, like I said, the bait that hatched earlier in the spring is getting bigger. There's a lot more for them to eat. And so in the fall, I focus a lot more on bait schools. Versus the springtime, I focus a lot more on the pattern changes that you see where they're going from their winter dwellings and kind of getting into that summer routine where they're actually coming out of the deeper water and moving shallow.
And he's talking about those big bait fish schools. If you've got the bait fish schools, that's when you want to put a cast net around those, because those fish, that's what they're feeding on. Take the time to catch some of those, match your hook up to them, go catch them.
That kind of sums up a lot of what what I kind of wanted to talk about. Does anybody have any questions about, is there anything at all? I love, just like bass fish in a farm pond, I love points, I love drop-offs, anything. We have a great fishery right back here off of our dock. This area is very unique because we have Turkey Creek that feeds into this bay right here. What Turkey Creek brings in is consistent water temperatures. So in the winter time it's warmer, in the summertime it's colder. That colder water holds more oxygen. These fish can adapt to that lower salinity, and so you have this convergence point where you have really hot bay water, this really cold fresh water coming in, and you have kind of a marsh area where, looking kind of, zooming in a little bit, you have all this marsh grass back here. So you may have a small marsh island with one small point. And as you're pulling in there, you might see something, you might not. There could be a redfish sitting on either side of that just waiting. If you have a current, let's say that Turkey Creek has overcome the incoming tide. Right now, all of our water is moving out. That fish is going to be sitting so that that bait just goes right past his nose. And so you're going to pick up on little things like this. You come into Turkey Creek, you notice that the water's going out, you might see a log, a tree in the water, you might see, for whatever reason, a smaller shallow spot with a drop off. Those fish are going to be oriented some way to allow the natural movement of water to bring bait past them to make it easier. They're always eating, but there's this preservation of energy. They want it to come to them. So that's why I'm a lot more visual when I fish. My bay boat does not have a fish finder on it because I love the hunting side of things. I'm a lot visual, so I kind of gravitate towards that shallower water, and I am fishing anything that I can see. I do use Google Earth a lot to kind of help with that, to find those drop-offs. I'm sure a fish finder would help a little bit with that. But just the convergence points is anything that is going to allow something to come to that fish where they can ambush. Man. You give me something, Chris.
I was going to say we could give away some stuff and take a little break, and then if you guys want to look up here or think about any more questions.
Back in the day, I used WD-40.
WD-40 is a myth that I have spent so much time arguing on the boat. So when WD-40, and I don't know if this is true or not, this is only from the research that I've done. What I've read was that when WD-40 was first created, it was fish oil based. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. What I've read is that now it is more of petroleum based, and so there's this old wives' tale that if you spray your lure with WD-40, it's a fish oil. Years ago, when I was real young, we tried testing this out. Of course, we had live shrimp, so we're spraying live shrimp with WD-40, and it just killed everything in the bucket. So whether that's true or not, hey, if you have high level of confidence spraying your lure, do it.
I'm almost 60, so this is back in the 90s.
And don't ever come into the tackle shop and tell us you put WD-40 on your reel, because it will ruin your fishing reel. It's the worst thing ever.
Fishermen, fishermen are superstitious people. I got a buddy that
Jig and pig or a purple worm or Texas rig worm.
Hey, if you are comfortable with a Texas rig wormed out here, do it. I got a buddy that gets on my boat and he pours out a Busch Light every single time.
That's because it's not fit to drink.
he just gives one up. That's his thing. And then
I think we've gone off topic.
oh, okay, all right.
Okay, so we have a couple things to give away for you guys. Get out your little tickets that I gave you when you came in 9005. Woo! ECM hat and a Key West t-shirt. Thank you for coming. We have a $25 gift certificate to the parts department. And we do have some new hats and shirts in there, so there is something you can buy for $25, or you can put it towards whatever you're buying in the parts department.
1/1000th of a new boat.
Yeah. Nice. Hey, if they don't have it down there, they can order it for you.
All right, and then the last one is from our Emerald Coast Bait and Tackle guys. They have a shirt and a hat, and we have 9008.
Cool.
The bait shop by AJ's.
It is right there on Cinco. Yes, ma'am. It went from 600 square feet to 6,000 square feet in January. So that's what ended up pulling me here from my previous location on the East Coast.
Do you have water access?
Do we have water access? No, but they're trying to figure out if that's ever possible. But there's a huge piece of, I don't know if you would consider it legislation, there's a small battle going on that they're trying to put 50 boat slips on the backside of Cinco right there. And there's a whole bunch of, few people want it, a lot of people don't. So we'll see what happens.
Emerald Coast.
You can pull, they have said that you can pull up to AJ's, run over, get bait, call before you do that unless you want to fish with gulp shrimp, because live shrimp has been very difficult to come by. Whenever it gets super hot, the grass gets thick, they can't pull the nets for them. At least that's what they've told me, and I haven't went with them. So I just kind of base it on what they're telling me.
Haven't seen consistent live shrimp in this area
Yeah.
in 10 years. probably.
Live, when, the people that are kind of in the know, a text message will go out when a tackle shop has shrimp, and they're gonna sell out that day. It's just like the ammo shortage, just about, because shrimp works.
Well, before the heat took part of us, it was between that last weather storm. We had been out of shrimp for 24 hours since that store had opened. So, since it opened in the new location. So he tries to keep it pretty consistent, but Josh relies on it because he runs charters.
Emerald Coast Bait and Tackle is a great resource to go to. You'll walk in there and the guys behind the counter, they smell like they just got off a boat. They look like they just got off a boat, and it's true. And so these guys, they are fishing before their shift. They're fishing after their shift. And some of them, you like, do you work here? It looks like a little kid. And he could outfish me any day of the week. So, going to a tackle shop and just making friends with those guys, again, goes back to cyber scouting. Simon wants you to catch fish because he wants you to buy stuff from him. But those guys that work in tackle shops are there because they live it. And so spending the time talking to them it's worth every minute of your time. You're going to walk out with all these great accessories, which are so fun, but you're going to walk out with information.
Here's opening the tackle shop because I think it's way better than Facebook. Because people come in there and talk like it's just a free zone.
Yeah, the Facebook fishing groups, wherever you are, there are gonna be Facebook fishing groups. Find them and join them. People are catching fish and they want to brag about it, and they're gonna post pictures, and you're gonna see patterns. Right now, our Facebook group, anybody that's in our local Facebook group cannot say they don't know about the incredible tarpon fishery that has been growing here the last couple of years. Because if you're in the Facebook group, you're seeing these people that are posting pictures of it. And that right there is saving you so much time. If you can only fish a couple weekends a year or a month, then being on that Facebook group, you're seeing the guys that are fishing twice as much as you. You're compiling all that information, and you're going to be able to use that the next time you're trying to plan a trip.
Can you freeze the shrimp if you don't use them? Use them again?
Yes, there's something about live shrimp that having the live shrimp is very important for a couple of reasons. One, the most important reason is that little shrimp is going to fight back. So when you throw that live shrimp out there and you have all the little bait fish, because everything wants to eat a shrimp, that shrimp is going to fight back just enough to hopefully stay on your hook a little bit longer for that trout or that redfish. Dead shrimp, you cast it out, it's free game for anything.
What's the tidal influence on the bay? Is it better to fish tide coming in or going out?
So we have, what is it? Is it diurnal? We have one tide change a day. And it is different wherever you are, and again, it's changing every week.
And there's a whole bunch of apps that'll help you key on with the moon phase and all that. Do fish the moon phase. I know that's a total off topic, but I follow, if we've got a high pressure pushing down on top of us, 2 days ahead of time, you're gonna see a different fish bite in the exact same area.
So I think that tidal flow is more important the closer you are to the tidal flow. So when I'm fishing Destin, when I'm fishing the bridge, I like an incoming tide, but at the same time, somebody else is going to like an outgoing tide for different reasons. When you start getting farther away from it, I think that the depth is a little bit more important. So like back in here, if you have an incoming tide, while it is incoming, it's so slow that it doesn't really influence the movement of bait a whole lot. But when you have an incoming tide, you have deeper water, those fish can go farther up into the grass where the crabs are hiding and things like that. So when I'm fishing marsh, I love a high tide because I know those fish are going to follow that water in and look for that bait they normally don't have access to. And I also like an outgoing tide because even if it is very, very slow and it's not really influencing the bait, it is still helping draw some of that out. I think that fish generally follow the tides in and out, but...
And a journal will help you keep up with spots that you're used to fishing, because unfortunately, I can't always fish the tide I like to fish, so I go when I can. So I have to have some sort of idea. Well, I caught them here at high tide and I caught them here at low tide, and here's a happy medium. So just a reference point, and then you know what boat launch you're going from too, if you've got notes of spots that you like to fish.
Yeah.
So you write all that in your
A lot of it's mental, but they make tide books that will have the tide recorded, and I'll make small notes, whether it's an R for redfish or a T for trout, and then what kind of bait I was fishing that day.
There's a lot of apps for your phone designed exactly for logging what you're doing. And it will automatically log what the weather conditions were for your area, what the moon was, what the tide was. There's an app that I used to use where you could take a picture of a fish and it would save all the weather data for that GPS area that you were in. And I think that all that is extremely helpful. I don't really watch that as much. That's my opinion based on my experience. While I do think tides are important, when I have the opportunity to go fishing, I'm going. And so in my opinion, while that information is relevant, it doesn't change whether I'm fishing or not, so I just go.
What are your thoughts on live bait, shrimp versus like pinfish down here?
So, oh man, the biggest trout you're ever gonna catch is gonna come on a little pinfish or a little croaker. It's a little bit more effort. A cast net is great to have to learn how to use. There's a million YouTube videos on how to throw a cast net. And if I am committing to live bait, I'm gonna make sure that I've got a shrimp bucket and I've got a live well with some fin baits in it. If I get into an area where there are big lone trout cruising and I can see them, I am going to put all my focus into getting a small pinfish in front of him, because those bigger fish, they are looking for a little bit more substantial baits, and those pinfish, I mean, it's can't like a silver dollar sized pinfish is awesome.
The shrimp's going to catch more fish, but your finfish are going to catch your bigger fish. Is what I've seen.
To be honest, I bought a $40 pinfish trap for you guys. I've been using that. And I've been getting a ton of pinfish.
So the pinfish that he's referring to, you're probably going to have to go to a minnow trap to be able to get the smaller ones. I promise I'm not trying to sell you anything else. But you bought the offshore, you need the inshore.
Yeah. Pinfish are feisty, man. And so those pinfish traps will normally get you those larger pinfish, which are awesome offshore bait. But we like them small. We're using small hooks, small lines, small baits. I prefer a cast net over a trap because I always forget to bait the trap the night before. So I can go out with my net, I can make a couple of throws, and I can put them right into the boat. That does bring up one thing I want to talk about. Pete, you will, when you commit to using live shrimp, you're going to buy a bucket of live shrimp, you're going to get on your boat. Do not dump them into your live well. When that boat is floating, that live well is picking up water from the surface and putting it in your live well. That surface water is hot, it's usually lower salinity, it's got less oxygen in it. Buy your shrimp, buy a bait cooler or an insulated bucket and just keep them in that bucket with an aerator and keep them cold. Put some ice cubes in a Ziploc bag or freeze a water bottle. If you keep your shrimp in that original bucket, you can add some water if you want to, but you keep an aerator going and you keep them cold, they will last forever. You talked about freezing your shrimp. I have a big Yeti cooler at home. If I'll go buy 8 dozen shrimp, whatever I don't end up using, I'll put into that cooler at night. And as long as I keep an aerator going and I keep them cold, I can pull shrimp out of that cooler for 4 or 5 days. You're gonna have some die off, just pull them out, but that you can save your shrimp as long as you take care of them.
Be sure to get the dead out, because when they die, they produce ammonia and they'll just kill each other quick.
But yeah, if you've had bad luck with shrimp, you've been dumping them in your live well and for whatever reason you either can't catch them because you got a massive live well or they're dying off really quickly, what a lot of people don't realize is, again, that the live well pickup is right at the surface of the water. The water that it's picking up is not ideal for keeping those shrimp alive.
What about turning that off, the pickup, and just recirculating?
Yeah, that's something that you can do, absolutely. I have an insulated bucket that has a styrofoam liner on the inside. And I actually prefer that because if you put 8 dozen shrimp into a bucket, they start stacking up on top of each other, you have a lot of die off. If you have a styrofoam lined bucket that they can kind of hold on to, it allows them to spread out a little bit so they're not crushing each other. And in my opinion, they live longer. So, yeah.
Anybody got any other questions?
I have a ridiculous one.
There's no ridiculous questions.
When I was growing up, my dad says, be still, be still. So you just stand there or sit there with your rods just straight out and we're afraid to move. And then we have neighbors, young girls, like 12 years old, and they sit there and bob their rod the whole time, and she catches them.
Just depends on what you're fishing with. I mean, I don't like, if I'm fishing with live bait, I still am tempted to work the live bait and cover more ground. Very rarely do I just sit there and wait for Roddy, the rod holder, to catch the fish. I usually like to hold that rod and catch them. It depends on what I'm using, but yeah, I'm usually not standing still when I've got a rod in my hand.
Yeah, you know, in inshore fishing, inshore hunting, you are trying to present a bait naturally to that fish, and you're trying to convince him to eat it. You're trying to draw a reaction for whatever reason, and it is, you know, so much comes into play, but you're trying to present a bait as naturally as you can, but you're trying to present a bait to a fish that isn't used to fish coming to it, you know, directly at it. You see, you know, a trout swimming, and you cast out and you reel your lure directly towards that fish, and you wonder why he spooks. That fish is not used to seeing a fish come to him, and so that just kind of plays into, you know, if you're wiggling a rod, you might somehow be able to impart a wounded reaction out of, or that bait is going to act oddly, and you might be able to draw that reaction strike out of that fish. That's something that because I love sight fishing. The biggest mistake people make is they'll see a fish cruising a sandbar or something, and they'll put a bait perfectly 10 feet in front of it, and that fish will just kind of veer off and you never see it again. You're casting too close. Those fish can see really well, and the last thing you want is this fish to be swimming and they can see out of, a big trout that's in shallow water, its number one predator is a bird. So when they're swimming in that really shallow water, while they're looking for something to eat, they're looking something trying to eat it. So they're swimming along and they see a lure come and then land, and it sinks right in front of them. All right, I'm out of here. And so that's something where it's a little bit of a risk, because you do want to get a bait in front of that fish, but you want to get pretty far in front of it. So that's a big mistake that I see people making all the time, is just plopping a lure on its head, hoping to make it as convenient as they can. This fish is not used to things being convenient. If you can surprise it a little bit and have him, swim up. I prefer to fish, at a 45-degree angle, and if I can get that fish to veer off course to me, then I know that I'm in a position where I am working this lure, I've got his attention, I'm trying to draw a strike. If I put it right in front of him, 9 times out of 10, he's moving on.
You mentioned braided line earlier. Is that instead of monofilament?
So I fished mono growing up in western North Carolina in the mountains trout fishing, and I moved to the East Coast when I was 22, and braided line hit me in my face, and I did the mono to braid conversion. A lot of your old school fishermen have stuck with mono. It works for them. It's got a whole bunch of stretch to it. Braid has 0 stretch. So if the fish runs into your minnow, you're going to feel it. Or if you're fishing with mono, maybe not. Braid is, I don't think it's more difficult to tie knots with, but a lot of people will say it's more difficult to tie knots with. So there's a couple of gives and takes. Your braid is way more expensive than your monofilament, where your monofilament would cost $2 to fill up a reel. Most of these reels have $30 to $50 worth of braid on them. So it's a give and take. It's a fill it out. Everything I've got has braid on it.
How long does it last if you haven't used it in 4 years?
Real answer or salesman answer? Forever. I mean, I've had it on some reels for 5 years.
Okay.
Salesman answer is every year you replace your braid, depending on how much you fish.
Yeah.
Now, monofilament, you are replacing it because it degrades in the sunlight very easily. But if you're dealing with people that don't know how to fish, i.e. Josh, the owner of Emerald Coast Bait and Tackle, he's not all the time, but on a charter boat, you never know who's going to get on your boat that day. I ran some charters on the East Coast. I had a couple rods. A couple would have mono on them, a couple would have braid on them, because mono was easier to cut a knot out of, where braid wasn't. If you're going to win knot in braid, unless you're super patient, it's a whole lot easier just to cut it. So I would kind of fill it out on who had the rod in their hand. But all of Josh's reels on Destin Inshore Guides fishing boats is mono across the
monofilament is a lot more forgiving. I kind of use a hybrid system where I have braid and monofilament. and I'll get into that in a sec, but I use braid because it casts better, it has no memory. Again, I'm standing on the bow of my boat, I'm gonna make 100 casts in the morning. It's a lot more comfortable to cast braid than it is monofilament. You're gonna be able to cast farther more comfortably, so that's what I do.
And I didn't say capacity versus diameter. Yeah. So this is 8 pound, which is 1 to 2 pound mono. So if I put 2 pound mono on here, I probably couldn't catch that 38-inch redfish. But if I fish 8 pound braid and have a little bit more forgiveness, I've got 100 yards of 8 pound braid on here. This reel has 300 yards of 30 pound braid. And if I spooled it with mono, I'd be fighting to get 300 yards of 15 pound mono on it. So it's about like an 80% cut in size, where your 30 pound is like 8 to 10 pound diameter.
So yeah, you can fit a lot more line with that braid because it's a smaller diameter. So as small as I can get away with. Most of my combos, I'm fishing braid that's 12 to 15 pound braid. The way I spool my rods up is it will all be braid except the last 6 feet. I rig what's called a wind-on leader. So I use a line-to-line knot that's very, very small, and that allows the last 6 feet of line to be 12 to 15 pound monofilament. I do that for a couple reasons. Like you said, monofilament has some stretch to it, so when I'm setting the hook, that extra line is just going to give me a little bit of forgiveness. It's harder for the fish to see. Fluorocarbon is good. It disappears. I always use it. And it is easier to cut and retie with monofilament. So basically that last 6 feet of my monofilament leader is sacrificial. I tie on 6 feet, at the end of the day, it might only be 4 feet long. Because I can catch a fish, if I have a nick on it or I want to change lures, it's no time I cut it with my teeth, retie real quick, and I'm back in. Braided knots require a little bit more commitment, a little bit more experience, because braid reacts very, very differently. So that's how I like to do it.
And I keep 6 spools a leader in my tackle box, 8, 10, 12, 15, 20, and 30. And I'll cover the spans. If something's super finicky, we were offshore yesterday, I wished I would have had 10 pound fluorocarbon. We had 20 pound red snapper in a chum slick, and we went from I started 80 pound fluorocarbon. This is a totally different, obviously we're offshore. We went from 80 to 30, and I saw him shy away from every single one of those leaders. Yeah. So I go from big to tiny. 30 I'm not really using inshore, but if we're around some heavy docks and we're getting broken off consistently. But this reel's got 8 on it, this one's got 30. And I kind of keep a tackle box that'll cover most applications from the pass to all the way back here.
Yep. As small as you can get it in fluorocarbon. That's what I tell people. Fluorocarbon is interesting. It sinks, which helps, in my opinion, with the baits that I'm trying to present. And it sinks because it's as close to the same density of salt water, which is how they supposedly make it disappear. But it's the way to go. Having that monofilament is, it's important in my opinion. Every rod I have is rigged the same, but that's every single one of my buddies that gets on my boat, regardless of the size that they're using fluorocarbon, and I agree with them for everything.
And I don't know how far ahead. He's mentioned knots multiple times. If he wants to do something with knots, I'm more than willing to help do something like that if somebody's interested in some knot tying, because there's 100 different knots that you can tie. I tie about 3. I know he mentioned keeping 6 foot a leader, so I know he's fishing an FG knot.
FG or Albright.
Yeah. So it just, certain knots go through certain guides. I don't have an FG knot on here. I tie a uni and a uni knot most of the time, just because it's super quick and easy, and it holds on the braid and fluoro.
I have about 3 knots that I tie for inshore fishing. I had to Google the names of them this morning because I couldn't remember what they were. I've been tying them my whole life. The best thing to do is YouTube. To learn knots, get on YouTube. Before you get on YouTube, the argument will last forever, but if you get on fishing forums and Google it, you're gonna see all these knot tests. Everybody's knot is better than the next one. Pick a couple of them and just be really good at them, because you can tie the strongest knot in the world but tie it incorrectly and you're gonna keep losing fish. You're gonna say, man, that knot sucks. Well, no, it's just you need to be really good at what you're tying, because the weakest point in your line is that knot. And so if you're not tying a good one, regardless of the line that you're using and the strength of it, that when your line is breaking, normally if it's not teeth, it's a knot.
Any other questions?
What about when, as the season goes on, the target that you're going for? Do we have like runs? I mean, I know target, everybody talks about the target run. Pompano run.
Yeah.
I fish for pompano in the spring. I mean, I just kind of fish for whatever's. I like catching fish. Like I said earlier, if ladyfish are popping on the surface, I got a rod for those too. I like catching fish.
I think that every saltwater fish kind of has a run or a pattern, and they're all a little bit different. Like you said, the pompano, they run the beach. Well, trout, they don't school up and go run the beach. But late in the fall, when we have these huge schools of menhaden, our trout will group up and they'll follow those menhadens there. That's the trout run that we talk about in the fall, is you can go out into the middle of the bay and find a school of bait with birds diving on it. And you can be in 30 foot of water and be catching trout on tiny little spoons all day long because there's just so much bait there. Redfish have a little bit of a run when they are moving offshore to spawn. That kind of happened once already. We will have another one in the fall.
If you've never seen the monster redfish, when they're on top, they'll eat anything. That's when if you want a confident bite on some artificials and you're not confident, all you gotta do is get a bait in front of them. It does not matter, and they'll eat it because they're trying to forage and then pop offshore, produce, and then come back in.
Yeah. So, and that's every species does have something like that. Some are better than others and different. But learning those patterns, you'll pick that up. Like the fishing trip that Dave and I did, the best red fishing trip I ever had. The fish were supposed to be moving offshore to spawn, but for whatever reason, we had a drought that summer, so the salinity was a lot higher in the bay. So the menhaden spawn that we had was very successful. So what we found was these redfish were not moving to the pass to go offshore to spawn. They were staying at the mid-bay bridge. And we consistently caught 40-inch redfish for 2 months. I was taking customers out there every day. It was the most predictable fishing I've ever experienced in my life. For whatever reason that year, the conditions worked out that these fish, while they did eventually move out to spawn, they were super delayed with that because there was so much food they just couldn't leave it. And so that was a redfish run that we saw. And it has happened a few times before. I have not caught it some years. But when you can, I know when it's coming because I watch my Facebook groups, and all of a sudden I start seeing pictures posting with Mid-Bay Bridge in the background. I start seeing the Mid-Bay Bridge. I know it's happening, and I start making that plan to go fish it. And it's going to be different time. It's last year it happened in September, and it wasn't as good, but it was pretty good. So.
Did I see one more question I thought I saw?
Yep, so I use, this is, where's mine? This is what I prefer because I take friends and family out. I have all my tackles the same. What I noticed, if I had different rod and reel combos on the boat, some would be more appealing for whatever reason and they get used more. And so I'd have one rod that I'd owned for 5 years and one rod that was broken after a month. So this is what I use. It's a 2500 Penn reel. It's a Daiwa rod. The whole combo is about $100. I try and get 2 years out of them, and then I normally give them away and update. It's affordable enough. I try and take care of it as best I can. Anyways, so I use 12-pound braid, and then I use what's called an Albright knot. Knots are difficult to teach without big pieces of rope, but if you go on YouTube and you Google the Albright, Albright, knot, it is a really good braid to monofilament knot that with small diameter lines, the knot will still stay as a small diameter. That's really important because it's going through my guides. Right now, the knot is actually right up here. And so it kind of blends in really well. This knot is going through my guides. And so I need to make sure that it's very small so that when I'm casting, it's not catching in any of my guides. It's not going to slow down my cast at all. I do that because, again, I have This section of monofilament line, it's going to hide my braid. It's going to give me a little bit of shock. It's easy to cut and retie. I don't know, I have a high level of confidence in it. So this is how I rig them.
And when he's fishing 6 foot a leader, I don't like hearing the knot go through the guide, so I keep mine on the outside of the rod tip. So I'm proficient at tying knots, so I don't really think about retying, but I'll start out with 3 to 4 foot a leader, and if I'm trout fishing, I'm putting on a new grub and switching out colors, then I'll trim it back until I get to like 12 inches, and then I'll change it out and retie. The only time I use a big leader is if I'm doing something outside the pass where I need a bunch of stretch, and that's where my FG knot will come in. So if you want to learn some of these knots, if you stop in the shop one morning, I'm more than willing to give you some pointers. I got enough line behind the counter for every knot in the world.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, the Albright knot, that's one, I don't know who taught me that knot, but it's one that I use religiously. Every single one of mine is set up that way. My bass rods, I love bass fishing. I keep braid on everything. I'm still rigging it the exact same way because I'm confident in the knot. I tie it well. I know that it's going to handle what it needs to do, and I'm confident.
Thank everybody for coming tonight.
Good job. Confident. I think that was the gist of the whole thing. I like that.
Good time.